Welcome to Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt of the Marquardt Law Firm at marquardtlawfirm.com.
Welcome to Talk Law Radio. I'm Todd Marquardt, on the radio, on podcasts, on YouTube, on Facebook, and on talklawradio.com. We've been talking about the Uvalde school massacre because there's a lawsuit that was filed in Los Angeles against Instagram, the video game Call of Duty, and the gun manufacturer Daniel Defense. And we've been talking all about the psychological issues involved. And now I want to ask you, Blake, about other types of media that gets blamed for behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. So this highly reminds me of Eminem in the 90s and early 2000s when he was getting criticized for his lyrics, as well as in one of his songs, he even says, like, blame me and I'll be the one getting sued over you if you assault somebody. And so this just reminds me of that so heavily because essentially people try to put the blame on other things for causing issues for people. And it's just, as I was mentioning previously off the air, I mean, it's no different than nowadays with rap music that I'm a big enjoyer of, with Future, Lil Baby, Lil Uzi Vert. I mean, they rap about drugs, sex, gang violence, selling drugs as well. And I mean, just because I listen to that, I'm not out on the corner selling drugs, or I'm not in a gang or trafficking guns or anything of that nature. So it's kind of just things of that nature where people just try to push it off on someone else and blame the media of that for causing the issue that is completely mental.
But I want to ask you, John, because part of this lawsuit is about advertising, and in the 80s and 90s, the cigarette manufacturers were targeted for advertising to minors because they said it works. You've been Joe Camel, you've been advertising directed at minors, and they've been buying your product. So do you think that there's a psychological aspect to the advertising component?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, these individuals have, advertising executives and creative directors. They need to have an insight in order to sell a product. But I think what we're missing is that the individuals who are going to be doing this didn't need advertising. They didn't need Joe Camel. They didn't need any of these things. They were going to be doing it anyway. These things they could point at and say, well, look, you're clearly targeting me with this, image that the direction is going the wrong way. The arrow is pointing in the wrong direction is what I'm trying to say, which is these individuals already had the impulse to engage in whatever the behavior was. They just needed some kind of excuse to do so. And advertising, music, movies, video games, all of these things are pointed to as the reason why. And I understand. I mean, these families are hurting and they need someone to blame, because the person that they absolutely should be blaming isn't here to blame. They're not here to stand trial for the hurt that they've caused these families. And that leaves a gaping space within each of these family members and all these victims, because now they don't get their day in court. And if you don't get your day for justice, then you have to find ways of bleeding that rock.
Yeah. So in your experience as a consultant for attorneys in court cases, do you think if the shooter is brought to trial, do you think that that's enough of a remedy?
For some. I think for some it satisfies. I think for others, a change in Political representative would probably suffice. For others, they were always going to look for as much, for as many people to blame as they could, because the loss is so great. For them, the loss that they're experiencing, and none of us can quantify that kind of loss. None of us would ever know how much hurt that they are experiencing. And sometimes you just need more to try to fill in that space to get something. So I think it just depends on each individual. And that's not to say that if those family members that only blamed the shooter, that they're somehow lesser than, or their grief is lesser than those parents who are blaming the shooter and guns and parents like that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that some people, that their experience of grief is such that, you know, it'll never be filled no matter what you do. And so you try to do as much as you can in order to try to fill it.
And I hate to roll back on it, but I'm gonna pull it back. If you don't have a religious way to handle this, because the great questions in the world are why. Okay, that's one of the most difficult questions of anything to answer. And I don't know how you're going to fill that hole. Okay, it's going to be extremely difficult and take such a long time and all. And I would hope that some people have some type of religious or some peaceful aspect that they can draw upon to give themselves strength. They won't get the complete answer of why, but it'll help them accept it and move on, because that's the most difficult part, I think. And I'm not trying to step on your toes there, John.
Yeah, no, it's the act. It's you know, we see this a lot in, you know, the shooter drills, right? The active shooter drills and something like that. A lot of that is just based on this idea that we don't want to cause panic. Mm-hmm. We don't want the children to panic. So if we give people something to do, if they can feel as though they have some authority or some agency in engaging in some behavior that they are capable of doing, run, hide, fight, you know, whatever that is, or, you know, having these lawsuits and targeting these individuals for compensatory and punitive damages, for any of these things is a thing that we can do. It gives us our control back. So
I want to talk about some of the resources that the law has been providing to schools. You know, we have counselors, we have school resource officers, which are policemen, right, that are at the schools. Have you been hearing anything in your community, your industry, about how to either help children avoid this or deal with it if it does happen?
So I know early on there were some counselors that went there specifically for the traumatic event itself. You know, they consider it a psychological first aid, a first responder in that way. Some counselors have stayed, but from my perspective, each community must heal itself. Each community is its own living, breathing thing, and an outsider, so like me, I obviously don't live in Uvalde. I could go there and I could do the best that I can, but ultimately I'm going to be the person that leaves, which could cause another traumatic event if they're, you know, drawn to me and, you know, we have a rapport and then I leave. Communities need to heal each other, and however it is that they choose to do so, whether it's tearing down buildings or keeping buildings or erecting monuments, however it is that the community decides, because as we were describing, community is really at the heart of this.
Right.
When you're disconnected from your community, that's when you start finding yourself in over your head. But when you are engaged and actively engaged in your community, that's when the healing is going to happen, because that's when we are connected to each other.
And so, Blake, you're a young parent. You have 2 little ones at home. What do you and your wife and your friends talk about when it comes to your kids are going to be in school someday? How are you going to deal with this?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest conversation we have is, you know, that fear, the unknown, because you can plan and do everything to be prepared for an event such as this, but it's just, is it ever going to happen? You don't know when. You don't know if people are going to be in situations where they're compromised, and so, I mean, that's the biggest conversation we have is what do we do to protect the kids and how? And at this point, unfortunately, I don't think there's a good answer.
Right.
Because as much as money you could dump in and put cops into schools, I mean, I think it was Stoneman Douglas. They had a resource police officer that didn't do anything. And so it's like you can and dump money into counselors. But to my perspective, what it really comes down to is, like I said, the conversations of fear, but you can't expect the schools to be the defense line.
Mm-hmm.
You can't expect the schools to be underfunded and funding cut and expect them to do anything that's going to have a widespread effect. It's got to be at this point on the parents to protect your kids.
And that's true. I mean, look at this in Uvalde. You don't think that all them police officers and all went through how many hours, how many millions of dollars were spent in training them, and they messed it up royally, okay, the way they handled it. One was to pass off of who's in charge and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't matter how much you train, okay? You know, when you hear that first shot of anger or you hear that first alarm go off, different things happen, okay? Like you were saying, it's the fight or flight or what comes in that you're going to do, and it's very difficult. Now, I'm all for the training, okay? Repetitious training creates a repetition, okay?
A habit.
When all your senses and your emotions are going crazy, you're following that repetition, okay? I'm following that teacher. We're going out this door. We're putting tables against the walls and all this kind of stuff. That's good, okay? That kind of training is very good, I think, because that's exactly what the military does. And the reason they do it is because of that. So
let's give John the last minute, something you want the audience to know about how to deal with this with their kids or what they should expect from schools. We'll give you the last minute as our expert today.
Talk to your kids. Talk to your kids developmentally. Talk to them all the time. Have them talk to you. Make space for them to talk to you about whatever it is. The more confident that they feel that they can come to you with anything, the more likely they are to come to you with anything. And schools should not be target hardened. Schools are not prisons. Schools shouldn't be erected with barbed wire and walls and fences and stuff like that because that instills fear.
Good point.
And we cannot live in a society filled with fear. The more we live in fear, the more likely some of those individuals are going to turn it to anger and turn it against us.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. That's all the time we have. I appreciate you. If you want to know more about Dr. John Delatorre, look him up online. We'll talk to you later.
This has been Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt, brought to you by the Marquardt Law Firm. You can learn more at marquardtlawfirm.com. And be sure to listen to the full Talk Law Radio show Saturday mornings at 11 on 9:30 a.m. The Answer.
Each week, attorney Todd Marquardt talks about the law. His mission with the Talk Law Radio show and podcast is to help you discover your legal issue blind spots. In the beginning, God had one law. Don't eat from the fruit of that tree. Then came the 10 Commandments. Now we have federal, state, and municipal lawmakers that won't stop creating new laws. Laws that might impact you without you knowing it. Listen to the show and drop a line on Facebook or email host@talklawradio.com and let the host know what you think of the show, the topics you want to hear, and whether you want to be a guest.